Hey, it's Drybear. We just finished theory crafting a bunch of leveling builds that people can use to get to endgame with Monk, and as we did with the Warrior and the Mercenary, I just wanted to do a recap review of Monk overall in its current state in early access. Now, I was able to make 4 viable leveling builds for Monk overall. I think they're all super fun. People always ask, like, which one is the strongest. I personally think that Tempest Monk is probably the fastest and easiest leveling experience. Glacial Monk is also super fun and a little bit more varied if you like that. And then Stormwave and Chaos are more for like flavor and variety. They're still effective. You'll still clear normal and cruel campaign, but I think that they're going to be a little bit slower or have their own niches compared to the other two. But in general, all of these builds I think are great for leveling to endgame if that's what you're looking for. And I'll leave links for them down below in the comments and in the description as well. Now, overall, I can say that I was pleasantly surprised with the Monk. I heard a lot of things about Monk post-release going into the melee play, and I've also heard that people were comparing Monk to Warrior as far as leveling and pushing to endgame and viability. And so after having worked on a whole bunch of leveling builds for Warrior, going through every part of Warrior's kit, making as much viable builds as I could, I was expecting the same going into Monk, and I can tell you that I got almost none of that, except for specifically Chaos builds and Acolyte of Chayula focused gameplay, which does feel to be a little bit lacking right now. But Invoker, Elemental, most of the Monk abilities, all of them are stellar. They feel great, they look great, and the clear speed and efficiency of it is insane. So Monk is definitely, in my opinion, jumped up to one of the best levelers in the game just because he's so capable in so many different areas. Now, looking at the abilities, I think that the Quarterstaff overall is really cool. There's definitely a comment to be made about the Quarterstaff not feeling like a traditional martial artist. I think a lot of people look at like the Monk gameplay from Diablo 3 as a reference. This definitely feels like it's a lot more of like a bender from the Avatar universe, using elements a lot more than just true striking. And I also do feel like while there is amazing like lightning gameplay from a lot of the lightning abilities in this build, especially using Charged Staff and Gathering Storm, I think a lot of that puts it together. And there's also a lot of great ice style gameplay with the big freezing, ice strikes spreading, explosions shattering, stuff like that. I do feel like there is definitely a little bit of a lacking area for some physical damage spenders. You do get a good amount, a lot of utility, so like Staggering Palm, Tempest Bell, Whirling Assault, Wind Blast, Vaulting Impact are all very utilitarian, and there also is some pretty good damage scaling off of Vaulting Impact in general, but I also found myself through many builds wishing there was some spender that didn't convert my physical damage into another element in some way. And there's tons of options here in the tree as well. We have like Quarterstaff nodes over here. There's definitely some like physical nodes here. There's a bunch more physical nodes as well. You can scale up things with unarmed. There's a lot of options for that, but it feels like they're almost kind of pushing you into doing an element while also having options for physical in the build that don't really crescendo into anything. It feels like they're definitely missing, like if I were to add a skill or two to the Monk Quarterstaff set, it would probably be a physical only damage dealing abilities, like something that's not meant for stacking up combo hits or doing AoE or building up projectiles or some kind of buffs or doing AoE with knockback or being able to, you know, build up days so that you can consume it on a stun and stuff like that. It just feels like there's no like spender big boom for a physical option for the Quarterstaff, and I really think that that is a miss for them. It really should be there. Like I think physical, wind, ice, and lightning should all be viable options for the Monk if you're trying to put it all together. Even just getting like a Whirling Assault option for this that actually had damage dealing potential, or like, you know, being able to block projectiles, or maybe like an active block kind of feel with a Quarterstaff, something a little bit more martial arts focus and less like narrowly focused on just ice or just lightning as an option with some synergy and utility on top of it. Now, that being said, overall, I think the Monk is really cool. Super fun. I think the elements and the effects that I actually personally just really like the particle systems in this game and how they present. And I think that if you're going to go lightning or ice, you have a lot of options available to you that really work together from that. You can also work in things like the elemental if you're doing invoker. You can even work in things like from ranger. And I think once we have spear and sword and axe, it's going to make a big difference for being able to swap that in, and potentially even using primal as well for some of the builds that you're using here that really could make this come to life. When it comes to Ascendancies, I think they're both super unique, but I also wasn't like crazy blown away with the options that we have for the Ascendancies. I think in the current state of the game, Invoker is just superior in most ways. Unbound Avatar is incredibly powerful. Being able to create shocked ground or chilled ground is also very valuable. You have some options with like evasion or armor, which really works on top of that. And there's also some really cool crit builds that you can make with this that I think really also brings Invoker into a really interesting spot overall. I didn't really find like crazy value for Meditate in general. It is a super unique ability, which I think is fun, but it also comes down to like the same idea. Like there are plenty of nodes in this tree that I feel like are kind of like a little bit troll in some ways. Things like investing energies where you get increased mana regeneration when you're stationary and reduced mana regeneration rate while you're moving. I think this is kind of like an interesting concept, but also the way the end game is set up and the way these boss fights are set up and the enemies in this game are set up with some enemies having mini stuns on their attacks, ranged enemies firing very quickly, explosives, and on death effects on the ground. I haven't really found situations when like not other than just fighting in Act 1 where you could stand still reasonably, and I guess you could stop and meditate, but I also feel like when you have a chance to meditate on the monk, it just doesn't feel like you need it anymore. The time when you can actually use Meditate is a time when you don't need energy shield because you're not in danger anymore. So I think there's definitely some things to think about when it comes to that ability, but it is cool to have. On the other half of this, for the Acolyte of Chayula, I think there's a lot of potential here, and I think they kind of need to decide what they want to do. I feel like Chalupa is almost there. There's some really unique ideas in here. I think the Into the Breach ability where it spawns the nodes that appear that are pretty cool. I mean, getting life and mana while running around is interesting. I think getting the stacking chaos buff is also super fun. You can increase the duration of Flames of Chayula, and you can easily get Mantra of Destruction to stack it up as well. I really like having chaos damage and chance to trigger chaos damage, and you can even do things with like Mana Leech and Shield, especially if you're going to do like CI, like Chaos Inoculation. Some of those things get really cool for the monk overall. And I think Darkness as a mechanic is super cool too. You remove all spirit, but you get like a secondary energy shield, all that fits together. However, there is kind of like a main gripe that I have with the monk, the Acolyte of Chayula right now, and that is it feels like they're a little bit too scared of chaos damage as a damage source, especially from a hybrid class like the monk, which is hybrid between intelligence and dexterity. And most of that is just related to the physical martial conversion system in the game right now, converting physical damage for a martial class into another element. However, there's none of that really for the chaos damage in general, which I think is a huge miss, right? There are some nodes, like you can convert physical damage into chaos here, a little bit of it, and even Mantra, like Mantra of Destruction is something that is actually quite useful for that. So if we go here and we grab this real fast, Mantra Destruction, it will convert the damage that you deal as chaos damage. But here's the problem, right? If you're building for chaos damage, like you grab all these chaos damage nodes, which are pretty scattered out. Like there's some up here, some down there, some over there. And then if you go closer to Witch, there's a bunch over there as well. You can pick them up. There's also chaos damage that you can get here, which scales up. If you get the darkness mechanic, you can get chaos damage. All of that adds really nicely together. However, the problem is with Mantra of Destruction, it converts the damage you deal with a quarterstaff attack into chaos damage. So if you're building for chaos damage, your quarterstaff attack is not going to do any damage. It's going to convert a small hit into chaos and then scale the chaos, which is useless. And the only chaos ability you have in the quarterstaff tree, Hand of Chayula, doesn't count as a quarterstaff attack, so you can't consume Mantra of Destruction to do chaos damage from your chaos attack. So it just feels a little bit like the chaos is just like being held back at the gates, like not being allowed to race along with all the other horses, just because they're kind of afraid of what it could turn into or how it could scale. But they could very easily change that if they added one or two abilities on the quarterstaff that were like physical into chaos damage, or they had chaos damage that could consume some of these effects, or you could mix with other elements. I think chaos could very easily take off. And I think just like the Meditate, they have to think about what they want to do with Into the Breach, because running around collecting nodes is a cool mechanic, but I think you need to have a gameplay style that plays around that. And I think if you're playing melee, it's harder to move around the fight constantly, picking up nodes, trying to get the flames or the recovery, which doesn't really fit a melee style, physical style character in some ways. So I think very small tweaks with a little bit more of a cleaner vision on Acolyte could very easily turn Acolyte into one of the most enjoyable broken characters in the entire game. But right now it just feels like they have too many like training weights on, holding them back, because it feels like the developers are a little bit too scared of what it could become. Another thing I will say about the Monk is that it exacerbates or makes obvious the challenges with the auto aim system in the game right now. And that is because most quarterstaffs will have an increased range. Like the reach of quarterstaffs is quite large. And there's also ways to add in more reach for quarterstaffs in general, which I think is pretty cool and interesting, but it also causes problems with the auto targeting, especially on controller. One of the biggest downsides of this is going to be the Tempest Bell. So when you put the Tempest Bell down, if you put it down next to you and then you try to attack it, it's going to auto aim to something closer, even though you're technically in auto attack range of the bell. So you end up like sometimes putting the bell behind you when the enemy is in front of you, or you put the bell next to you and you try to attack the bell, but it turns around and attacks a mob because they're technically, the auto aim thinks it's there. So I think in general, they probably just need to give an option to disable auto aim, and I think that's going to help monks more than anyone else, because monks definitely suffer from the auto aim the most. There's also kind of an interesting setup right now with power charges for monk. I think they're probably taking the right approach in making sure that endurance charges, frenzy charges, and power charges are a little bit gate kept on where you get them, how you get them, how fast you get them. There are some clever builds right now where you could use things like resonance to convert frenzy charges into power charges, and then you can use combat frenzy or sniper's mark to be able to convert, get a bunch of frenzy charges and then convert them into power. So you can do things like combat frenzy, which is actually quite useful for this, to be able to like put that together. You can even do things like even going into like the witch tree, you can pick up like their their profane ritual to get power charges. You can go into the bow tree and use like sniper's mark to get frenzy charges and convert them into power charges, and that gives you some really cool options. And also I think things like the charged staff or the projectile setup with staggering palm are both very cool and very thematic for them. And I think a lot of the the leveling experience for monk, I would say, is very good, and the end game like build experience for monk is also super cool, and it can scale really strongly. So like overall, I'm very pleased with where the monk is right now. There's definitely some weirdnesses and some missing elements for physical or wind, or specifically around chaos damage or doing the Acolyte of Chayula, but I would say the Invoker's in a great spot. The tree overall is in a good spot as well. There's definitely some issues with some, like a lot of the trees, like warriors missing some mana regen. There's definitely some missing options for like ailments for the mercenary. They kind of have to go to ranger to get it, and then we'll see kind of how that switches over. But I would say the tree overall, a lot of options here coming out of the start. Good defensive options, good charge options, recovery options for both mana and HP, spell damage options nearby if you want to go elemental, a lot of crit, things that line up with the builds, different elements, and you have some nice adjacencies. If you want to do poison, you can dip into ranger huntress. If you want to do like occult, you can dip into witch. If you want to do elemental, you can dip into sorceress. I think overall monk, I would say monk and then witch and sorceress feel the best right now based on their availability in the skill tree, their skills from their signature weapon, and how everything plays out overall.
If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.